All right, Alexander, let's talk about the missile strikes into pre-2014 Russian territory. The other day, we got the first missile strikes with Biden's permission from Ukraine into Russia. They targeted the Bryansk region, not Kursk, and five missiles were shot down. One missile was hit, and the debris fell on a certain target. I guess this was a military facility, from what I understand. No casualties. And this was reported on by the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Foreign Ministry. They were the first ones to actually admit, to come out with the news, admit that there were ATACMS missile strikes into Russia. So we got the first U.S. sponsored, U.S. coordinated missile strikes into Russia. What are your thoughts, and what comes next?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the amount of misinformation we're being given about the whole story of the ATACMS is absolutely incredible. Firstly, an ATACMS missile strike takes a while to prepare, several days at least, probably weeks. So that means that the actual decision to launch this attack must have been made some time ago. I am going to suggest it must have been made shortly after the US election. There was the election in the United States. Joe Biden learned that Donald Trump was going to win the election. And then sometime around then, he decided to authorize missile strikes into Russia itself. Secondly, we were told that the missile strikes were going to be located in and around Kursk region, in the pocket, that it was going to be done in order to assist the Ukrainians to hold the pocket and to attack North Korean soldiers there, and that the primary purpose of authorizing the strikes was in order to send a warning to Kim Jong-un. Well, the attack was not in Kursk region at all. It was not in the pocket. It did not, as far as one can see, target any North Korean soldiers. There's no evidence that any North Korean soldiers were in this facility. And if you listen to the reports, there's no suggestion that this did target North Korean soldiers. So we're being told an awful lot of things. Now, obviously, I want to stress we're being told these things in the media indirectly through all our usual friends, the anonymous sources. But we're being told all of this. And it's turning out to be untrue. Now, a number of other things. Firstly, the Russian Defense Ministry was, in fact, the first agency to confirm this information. And this was an attack with 6 ATACMS missiles. It's a big attack. Missiles like this, there's not that many of them. You have to have 6 launchers deployed to carry out this attack all at once. 6 launchers, reasonably close, by the way, to the Russian border. The attack failed. Now, nobody is saying this, except, of course, the Russians, but there is really no doubt that that is so. If 5 out of the 6 missiles were shot down, and the 6th missile was hit, and only debris hit the ground, and the Russian Defense Ministry is very careful to say that there was a short fire, but that no one was killed, no one was injured, no damage was done, and before long, we're going to have satellite data that's going to confirm that. Well, if that is the case, then this was an unsuccessful attack. So, an incredibly controversial decision, one which clearly does cross a Russian red line. The Russians already saying that this now confirms that the United States has become directly involved in the conflict, that it is now fighting Russia on Russian territory. There's considerable unhappiness about this decision on the part of many people in the United States. The world community outside the West is appalled. Italy doesn't like it. Other NATO allies don't like it either. Apparently, Chancellor Scholz in Germany, to some extent, left out of the picture. He's apparently stranded and is now feeling under a lot of pressure to authorize use of Taurus missiles, or even to step down so that the Taurus missiles can be set. So controversial. The UN Secretary General is unhappy. All of this done in this extraordinarily, way with all this misinformation and disinformation and misdirection. And what has it achieved? Nothing. 6 missiles, 5 shot down, 1 damaged, no damage to the Russian facility. All that this particular strike has achieved so far is to demonstrate the effectiveness of Russia's air defense system. The Russians are obviously ready for this. They've been preparing for this for a long time, probably ever since this whole thing started weeks ago now. And we can see that for the moment they're shooting down these very expensive missiles, which are relatively few in number. Obviously, there'll be more strikes, more attempts to get through, but already it looks as if the trade-off in terms of the effect as against the risks and the costs is, well, it makes absolutely no military or strategic sense.
I would say that this was planned even before the elections, because I think this went in coordination with the whole North Korea story. So that's when they decided they were going to launch they were going to give the green light for the ATACMS missiles. The Biden White House, that's when they came out with the North Korea story. That's when they gave the script to Zelensky. And they told Zelensky, this is the narrative that you're going to read. This is what you're going to talk about. We're going to go to all our media outlets, and we're going to also tell them what they need to write about North Korea, 3,000 troops, 5,000 troops, 10,000 troops, and we'll build it up so that we get to a moment when we launch, when we publish via Bloomberg a story talking about 100,000 North Korean troops. That's going to be the story that we're also going to, that's going to be the story that we run, and then we're going to give the green light for the ATACMS, and that's going to fall in the same time period as the G20. Yeah. So I think all of this was absolutely coordinated. Yeah. They were building up the North Korean story. They got to the Bloomberg story about 100,000 North Korean troops. 100,000 North Korean troops, my God. And they run that story. Last week it was 50,000. And that story was published by Bloomberg. We then have the G20. We also have the Biden announcement. So it followed after the meeting with Trump. So I think everything was very carefully scripted and coordinated. My question is why? Why do this? Why go forward with this? If you're the Biden White House, you gain nothing out of this except causing chaos in Ukraine. Okay, I can understand why Biden wants to do this. He's done with Ukraine. His family is done with Ukraine. God knows they've been in Ukraine for how many years? 10, 20, 25 years. They've been running around Ukraine. For them, it's over. They've gotten whatever they wanted to get out of the country. He's lost the conflict to Russia. Putin has defeated him. And so if you're Biden and you're angry, you say, okay, I'm just gonna wreck the place. You want to cause trouble for Trump. But if you're the team around Biden, I'm not talking Sullivan and Blinken. I'm talking other people, even Austin. If you're the Pentagon and you're Austin, you don't want to do this. Well, it doesn't make any sense if you're the Pentagon, if you're military officials. You should be against this type of escalation. So, where were they in the decision making process?
Well, notice that Lloyd Austin is remaining very quiet about this. I mean, he would normally be the person to come forward and actually announce this. And he hasn't done so. So, I mean, Lloyd Austin clearly isn't happy. No one in the Pentagon appears to be happy. But, of course, they carry out the orders of the commander-in-chief, who is Joe Biden, because that's what soldiers do. But, I mean, you're probably right, by the way, that this was decided even before the election. And I think we can again see what the objective in that case was. Firstly, if Harris won, it locks her in. It makes it very difficult for her to change the policy because she would be repudiating the policy that Joe Biden, who was the person who was her president and who was the person that of whom she was part of the administration, it locks her in. She can't really turn around and go against what the president of the United States that she supported, that she was going to succeed and whose administration she was a part of, what he had decided. And of course, if Trump wins, then it creates a mess for Donald Trump. I think this is principally a political thing. It's about locking in the United States and putting it into a trajectory of long-term war with Russia. And the thing to understand, when I say long-term war, I mean, continuing the proxy war in Ukraine, increasing the pressure on Russia, increasing the pressure on Putin himself, trying to create a major crisis between Russia and the United States. So remember, when we talk about Biden, he listens to many people. So he listens to Sullivan, quite obviously. He also listens to Tony Blinken. Blinken is a very, very much a hardliner on Ukraine. He's been agitating and pushing. We know this since the summer, to get this decision to launch these missile strikes authorized. So he is in favor of it. There's others. There's people who are still connected, I'm sure, to Victoria Nuland in the State Department. There's other people in various parts of the US officialdom who support this as well. So it's also very much about these particular people still wanting to keep Project Ukraine going, trying to lock Kamala Harris in, make problems for Donald Trump, provoke the Russians into a strong reaction that they can use. They're the narrative producers, because what you've described, by the way, build up the story of the North Korean troops and all of that. I'm sure that's absolutely right. Narrative construction, backed, as always, by a huge amount of misdirection. Well, you can see how these people operate. It's straight out of their playbook, and that's why they did it.
So this was the first strike. There's going to be more. From what I understand, the reports are that Ukraine has 50 ATACMS. I would say double or triple it. Who knows?
Yeah.
But there's going to be more ATACMS strikes. My sense of things are that they are going to target military facilities or try to hit military facilities, but they're also going to start hitting other areas. That's just my sense of things. The more this goes on, the more the strikes are going to become more erratic. That's my belief on what's going to happen, because they're going to get angrier and angrier. The more the Russians shoot the missiles down, the more angry they're going to get, and the more they're going to have a desire to hit something. That's just how these people act, behave, think. So you're going to get the ATACMS, you're going to get the storm shadows, you're going to get the scalps. Eventually, weak Olaf Scholz, he's going to give the green light for the Taurus, or Olaf Scholz is going to be pushed aside, and BlackRock, Frederick Merz, he's going to come in and he's going to green light the Taurus missile. So you're going to get all of these missiles hitting Russia. I think that's inevitable, and you're going to have some of them are going to get through. Some of them are going to get through, and they're going to cause damage. And the question becomes, what does Putin do? What does Russia do? Lavrov is talking tough. Medvedev's talking tough. Putin is very quiet. Peskov is being Peskov, right? He's doing his Peskov thing. The question is, what does Putin do? We just want to say we know the red lines. Everyone that watches us knows that there have only been two official red lines from Russia. But most of the rest of the collective West, a lot of people that are following news outlets from independent YouTube channels to CNN, MSNBC, whatever, New York Times, Washington Post, they still believe the narrative that Russia has issued 50 red lines: ATACMS, Leopards, Challenger red line, F-16 red line, HIMARS red line. They believe that. Much of the collective West believes that Russia's red lines have been continuously crossed. I would even say, Alexander, a lot of collective West politicians in Europe and the United States actually believe that Russia has issued 50 red lines and they've all been crossed and they've done nothing. Even though we know, our viewers know, there's only been two official red lines: NATO and long-range missiles. So the question is, what does Putin do now that an official red line has been crossed, while much of the collective West, including much of the political leadership, believes that 50 red lines have been crossed and he's done nothing, so he can continue to cross red lines?
This is what Putin is doing is absolutely typical of his decision making. When there was the Maidan coup in Ukraine, he disappeared for about 2 weeks, and he then re-emerged. There was clearly an internal debate, which took place within the Kremlin about what they were going to do, and then we saw events move very fast, and it ended with Crimea joining Russia. So the fact that Putin is going quiet is not a sign that he's not going to do anything. On the contrary, it's almost certainly a sign that he intends to do something. Now, what he intends to do is something we can only guess at. We simply don't know, but he is going to respond. Now, I've already said that part of what he's going to do, part of what the Russians are going to do, is that they're going to start providing more advanced technology and missiles and such things to their allies around the world, to Iran, to North Korea, to the various militias in the Middle East, probably to various militaries in Africa as well. We're going to see that. Remember, about 2 weeks ago, we did a program with Jim Webb, former US Marine officer, person who's much more informed about military matters than I personally am. And he made the point that the Russians are already casting a shadow in the Middle East. It's inconceivable that the Houthis could have developed the technologies that they have as quickly as they have to launch hypersonic missiles unless they were getting help from someone. Probably that someone was Iran, but Iran also needed to get help from someone. And almost certainly that someone was the Russians, either directly or through Russia's own proxies, the North Koreans. But now the Russians are going to be much more involved than they have been previously. So we're going to see that. Now, there is this story, and it's a difficult one to make a great deal of sense of, that the Russians have already been carrying out sabotage actions across Europe. And they might have been. I mean, we mustn't completely rule out that possibility. It might have been intended, by the way, as a warning in connection with this start of these attacks, the start of this story about the attacks, the missile attacks on Russia. And a couple of days ago, we had this underwater cable in the Baltic Sea mysteriously cut. The Germans and the Finns are now saying it was sabotage. Apparently, it might have been the Russians. I'm not saying it was, but we might start to see more of that as well. And that should not be underestimated. If the Russians start launching sabotage attacks of that kind, it will have an effect. The Russians have said that what they will do will be visible and public. So it won't just be sabotage attacks. It won't just be missile strikes. It will be something that they will take credit for. Missile strikes in the Middle East by third parties, I should make clear. It will be something that the Russians themselves will take credit for. I'm going to make a guess that initially it's going to be confined to Ukraine, and what they're going to immediately do is attack Western combat troops, advisors, technicians, administrators across Ukraine, wherever they can find them. Up to now, there's been a kind of policy that unless these people do things that go too far, the Russians won't hit at them, and they themselves will avoid striking at Russian targets. But now it looks as if all the gloves will come off and the Russians will start hunting these people. So it's going to be very, very dangerous for people inside Ukraine. And then the Russians have an ability to wait and judge their decisions at some point, very likely at some point next year or so, we will start to see action taken by the Russians somewhere else on the high seas, maybe American ships or Western ships, commercial ships seized by the Russians. After all, the Americans do it. Why shouldn't the Russians? Something of that kind might start to happen. But we will see. But there will be a reaction of that, we can be sure. There is also going to be a diplomatic reaction from the Russians. They've already made considerable mileage of this. They've already been able to speak to their various allies and friends, and they're going to consult with them too, by the way, about this. And they say, look, we are not the aggressive party. it is the West that is the aggressive party. They are attacking us. And I think more immediately, and I discussed this in one of my recent programs, I think they're also going to say that from now on, there is no question of Britain, France, the United States, and once the Taurus missiles are supplied, which I consider inevitable, Germany, none of these countries can provide guarantees to Ukraine. They're clearly hostile states, and we're not prepared to give them any room to provide guarantees to Ukraine, because that's simply forging an alliance between a hostile country, Ukraine, and countries that are even more hostile to us, which will, of course, make it even more difficult to achieve a diplomatic settlement of the conflict. And I think most Russians by now don't want a diplomatic settlement of the conflict.
Yeah, I don't think Trump, even if Trump is going to come into office, and even if he does intend to get some sort of ceasefire or end to the conflict, I think that Russia's not going to go for anything at this point in time other than an outright capitulation. Yeah. And if they don't get that, then a victory, a military victory. They have to establish deterrence. Absolutely. It has to be public. I don't think they have a choice in the matter. I think if they do these types of sabotage actions, I don't think that's establishing deterrence. I think that that the Russian public, I think the Russia's allies, are expecting something that shows that Russia's not going to accept an attack by the United States into Russia. I think these sabotage events, actually, I would throw out a conspiracy theory. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing out some ideas. I wouldn't be surprised if these sabotage events are being done in order not by Russia, but by other agencies, in order to start framing Russia because of the eventual retaliation that Russia is going to publicly take against the West. I mean, I don't see Russia cutting cables in the Baltic Sea. I think perhaps Sweden should look towards the Andromeda yacht, or maybe they should call up the ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK. I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Well, it is entirely possible. The amount of misdirection and misinformation that is taking place is enormous. Just go back and look at the completely, the fairy tales we have been told about the decision to launch this ATACMS strike on Russia. Clearly, the decision was made weeks ago. Clearly, it was being prepared for a long, long time. And all the stories about it being confined to Kursk and targeting North Korean soldiers who probably don't exist, we can see now that was all misdirection and fabrication. So given that is so, given the previous story, about the amateur divers who jump off a yacht and know how to destroy vast and complicated pipelines, all of that, given all this, why should we assume anything in relation to these sabotage attacks? That they're real, that they're carried out by the Russians. As you correctly said, the Russians have never done anything like this previously. So, we can't make any assumptions there. And on your main point, the Russians have already said that their retaliation is going to be visible, that they're going to take visible action, which they're going to take credit for in response to an event of this kind.
All right, we will end the video there, theduran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and X. Go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video. The link to the Duran shop is in the description box down below. Take care.